It's no secret that companies within the video game industry have taken a step back to evaluate what made their games so popular. From characters having an addictive personality, to the plot lines of the game being something fresh to fans, to something so simple as the graphics or game mechanics being revolutionary at the time of release. Something about previous releases of current franchises have fans wishing for more. With constant remakes of great games being released in new engines, we're looking at you Resi 2, people tend to speculate what remakes of games could possibly be around the corner for current gen release, but are almost always disappointed when their favorite games are overlooked for something more appealing to the masses of new age gamers. That's got us thinking about all the great games we used to play before the days of achievements and trophies, and which ones we'd love to see get some love once again. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 video games that deserve a second chance. Number 10. Death by Degrees, 2005. Despite this Tekken spin-off gaining mixed reviews from critics, the overall plot of Death by Degrees was widely praised for both its depth and ability to mix well with the Tekken lore. A huge problem fans had with this game was the difficult camera angles paired with the complex fighting mechanics. Granted, at the time, Namco didn't have much experience with using Tekken as an intricate game, rather than just an arcadey fighter. With the release of Tekken 5 and 6, they included extra modes that granted similar gameplay as Death by Degrees, but with less complicated mechanics and a more smooth way of controlling everything on screen. With technology advancing and new engines being made, it shouldn't be out of the question that Namco attempt another Death by Degrees-esque game. If it's a remake, it may generate more buzz within the community. However, a sequel or a different spin-off revolving around another character may be the best step forward. Number 9. PANDEMONIUM, 1996 to 1998. For at least a decade, platform games dominated the screens of many people. We still see platformers, but they're less frequent when it comes to mainstream games, except of course for the Mario franchise. For this reason, after the second installment of the PANDEMONIUM games, the franchise suddenly disappeared without word, much to the disappointment of some fans. This game was often overlooked, despite its innovative gameplay mechanics and aesthetically pleasing graphics at the time. It was a fun, challenging game that allowed you to pick between two characters, both having unique qualities. Games like PANDEMONIUM deserve a modernized remake, changing the platformer into something more open world, although having another platforming mode or side missions and quests would be a nice touch to commemorate the original material. Number 8. X-Men Legends, 2004 to 2005. Who doesn't love a good Marvel game? With the recent Spider-Man, Avengers, and Guardians of the Galaxy games, it's a wonder why no one has revamped the X-Men Legends games. They had a vast range of characters to choose from, with the ability to unlock even more, as well as an intriguing storyline for both installments. With the current gen consoles and PC, it seems like such a missed opportunity not to bring this one into the new ages, when online gameplay especially is common amongst the gaming community. Whether or not it would continue to use the original 3/4 isometric tilt camera or use a third-person over-the-shoulder camera could be up to the player with an in-game options menu. As much as a smash 'em up with Marvel characters keeps fans at bay, these series of games in a new engine with the possibility of DLC in the future is a chance that any gaming company would be a fool not to take. Number 7. EA's Harry Potter franchise, 2001 to 2011. Even though light has been shone on EA and the microtransactions within their games, there's no denying the company once made excellent tie-in games. A huge example is their Harry Potter franchise. The overall story is loved by generations of people, and with that, EA's games came into play. Their early games were extremely well received and considered incredibly fun right up to the Goblet of Fire installment. Now co-op has become more prominent and new engines have the capability to hold up proper and accurate remakes of these games. Many fans would love to see their childhood revive for a new age, and a big part of that would be EA's Harry Potter games. They have the knowledge and understanding of how some of their games failed in comparison to others, and have the skills to fix that the second time around. With the Hogwarts Legacy game arriving soon, this probably won't happen, but maybe someday we'll get that All-Stars collection of classics. Number 6. Bloodrayne, 2002 to 2011. Alright, hear us out on this one. Even though the writer rights were bought for Bloodrayne in 2020 and the original games were re-released in 2020 and 2021, it took way too long for anyone to grab hold of the opportunity that was, to some, the original Underworld. Because the franchise was untouched for 7 years before the release of Bloodrayne Betrayal, and the game varied so differently from the original and its sequel, it wasn't that well received by fans, and the fourth installment in the series was cancelled. When the rights were finally passed over and the franchise was given a boost of life, it wasn't enough to keep Bloodrayne alive for very long. As much as a proper remake sounds extremely appealing, a new darker sequel made for modern times has the potential to kickstart the franchise back to life, and grants the opportunity of redesigning such an iconic female lead. Number 5. Dead Rising, 2006 to 2017. The first 3 main games in Dead Rising were popular amongst critics and fans alike, with Capcom letting the side down by the 4th installment. Originally, a 5th entry was planned, taking place between Dead Rising 2 and 3, revolving around Chuck Green, the protagonist from Dead Rising 2. Unfortunately, this was cancelled due to the Capcom Vancouver team shutting down, and any hope of a future Dead Rising installment going with it. Bringing the Dead Rising franchise to the new ages would be a success in theory, as people tend to enjoy zombie games that don't take themselves too seriously. In essence, it's the Zomcom of Capcom zombie franchises, and considering the success of Resident Evil's remakes, with Resi 4 just around the corner, it'd be a shame not to grab the bull by the horns and bring back one of the most beloved franchises from that particular game company. Of course, fans would probably prefer Dino Crisis, as it's in much more dire need of a revisit and update, and with the success of the recent Jurassic World films, it's a surprise that Capcom hasn't cashed in on the Dino Mania either. Number 4. Silent Hill, 1999 to 2014. How could we make a list of games that need to be revisited without including Silent Hill? Beloved amongst horror fans for 23 years, it's why disappointment hit so hard when Silent Hills was cancelled in 2014. The game had high expectations with the involvement of filmmaker Guillermo del Toro and actor Norman Reedus, but it was never quite clear if it was a reboot of the franchise or a sequel. With the 2 main prior releases before Silent Hills, Silent Hill Homecoming and Silent Hill Downpour, fans didn't generally favor those games as they strayed too far away from the original trilogy. Silent Hill 4 The Room was also received poorly, but it's gained a cult following years later, so that was ultimately rectified by the fans themselves. Frequent teasers over the years have speculated that the Silent Hill franchise isn't as dead as it seems, with rumors of a soft reboot, remakes, and other teasers being made. It isn't fair to the fans to keep them hanging on this long, but on the other hand, we need Silent Hill back. Number 3. Resident Evil Code Veronica X, 2001. With the releases of the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, Code Veronica would have been the obvious next choice, continuing the chronology of the games released. Instead, Capcom jumped straight past it to initially announce their release of the Resident Evil 4 remake. Of course, this is great news for fans of the franchise, but it also left a lot of them wondering why they didn't announce Code Veronica instead, as it's been over 20 years since its release. Undoubtedly, Resi 4 trailblazed a new generation of horror games, which is why it's so easy to overlook its predecessor, even though it was generally well received. Resident Evil Code Veronica did have a really interesting story, seeing one of the protagonists from Resident Evil 2, Claire Redfield, finally reuniting with her older brother Chris, as well as bringing an old iconic villain back from the dead. Of course, the game had its faults, with fans, Steve Burnside being the most irritating character until Ashley in Resi 4, but ultimately was critically acclaimed, with mass amounts of praise directed its way. Not to remake this iconic story into the new engine would be a complete disappointment and fault on Capcom's part. Ultimately, this isn't the only Resi game that should be revisited with new, smoother mechanics and updated gameplay, but it should be the most prioritized. Number 2. Tomb Raider Angel of Darkness, 2003. The Tomb Raider games are considered one of the pioneering factors of female leads in video games, and have seen success with almost every release, peaking with the 2013 reboot. Unfortunately, the 6th installment in the original Tomb Raider franchise received negative reviews due to the more technical side of the game, such as mechanics, bugs, and camera movement. The story of this game is much darker than the previous installments, and most of the future ones, which was praised heavily. With Square Enix purchasing the rights to Tomb Raider, it's no surprise that their reboot was met with great success. However, it always seems strange that they never capitalized on the darker side of the Tomb Raider franchise until they made Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Originally, Angel of Darkness was was going to be the starting point of a new trilogy, but was inevitably cancelled due to the negativity directed toward the game, which was a complete disappointment for fans. With times changing and darker subjects being brought into light more frequently in gaming, the original concept of the cancelled trilogy should be given a second chance. A remake of Tomb Raider Angel of Darkness would allow the creators to update and patch bugs, making the game better than originally released. Number 1. The Simpsons Hit and Run, 2003. With the way this list was going, it's expected that another horror would top the list, but that's not gonna be the case. The Simpsons Hit and Run is the most popular Simpsons video game to date, despite the fact that it was the 22nd installment in the Simpsons video game franchise. Obviously, for many, it was seen as a rip-off of the GTA series, but somehow it seemed more child-friendly and quirky, which didn't gain a negative backlash like the other seemingly ripped-off games do. It has its meta moments, which generations now and then can both appreciate, and with The Simpsons still running strong despite the lack of favorable recent episodes, this would be a perfect time to re-envision, recreate, and reintroduce the world to an updated, smoother, and bigger version of The Simpsons Hit and Run. That's the end of our list, but do let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other video games that you reckon deserve a second chance. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.